Well, good afternoon. It is my favorite day of the week, which is every Friday. And the reason it's one of my favorite days of the week is we get to talk to you wonderful guys and gals all across social media and hopefully share with you some ideas, some concepts, some things to consider that will help you in your business to move to that level, those dreams you had the day you started. And as things keep coming up and changing, hopefully we're adding some value to each of you. Our show each week is sponsored by CVC Success Group, and it is our mission to provide you with some solid information that can help you move to that level. So this is this week's edition, and we have two great guests on today. Two people that are both friends of mine. I've worked with. I know both personally, know their capabilities, know what they've done in business, and know what they're doing today. And one of them is a gentleman coming to us from Port Washington, Wisconsin. And if you don't know where that is, that's about 20 miles north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he operates both a service and a retail business. The retail is called the Fire Factory, and the chimney service business is called Chimney Concepts. And about 2 years ago, Larry made a really brave move and purchased a very nice facility. I think it's close to 15,000 square feet, has a super duper showroom. It is really it's just a monumental thing that he's built up there. I was just there last week, visited with Larry on one of my client visits and saw where they're going. And we spent the day talking about things to go forward. So that's Larry Berg, one of our guests today. The other is my friend, Chuck Roydhouse. Chuck was a client of mine for a number of years. And one thing I saw about Chuck was a guy that was able to make high profits, and it wasn't a large company. He didn't run 30 trucks, he didn't run 10 trucks. Chuck was a specialist in making a high return from a small number of trucks. So I want to thank both of you guys for being on with us today, and hopefully you'll be able to add some value here. So, Chuck, I'm going to go to you first this morning. And our subject matter today is job costing. And job costing is where, when we do jobs, we actually know what our margin, what our net profit was on that job. So tell us about your feeling on job costing and how you did it and how you recommend the people to do job costing.
Well, sure. Well, thanks again for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys and hopefully add some value. I think the thing that you need to focus on that worked very well for me and other people that I've helped is you need to start to figure out what is your true break-even cost. So you need to know what it costs you to run your business, and that would be accounting for all of your overhead, rent, mortgage, vehicle payments, electric bill, everything that goes into it, salaries, vacation, the whole shooting match. And when you add that up and then you know how many billable hours that you can bill in a year, then that equates to a number. And then when you look at that number, if that's covering everything, well, then all you're doing is breaking even. You have a job and a salary. So above that, you need to add a profit margin to that, whatever is going to work for you. And that's going to be different by market area, and it's going to be different based on what your goals are as the owner of the company and what your return needs to be. But without knowing that true starting number, you're just fooling yourself with anything else.
Jerry, you're on mute.
I noticed that. So, whenever we're talking about this, I have a really big concern. And it's not just for the chimney business, it is for all forms of home service contractors. And that is, everybody wants to talk about how much they gross, what their total sales were. But you know, the part that I never hear them talk about is what's the bottom line net profit? In your opinion, what's the important thing in business? Is it that gross number that we are a $10 million a year business? Or is the important one that bottom line number?
So it is always the bottom line because that's what you get to keep in your pocket when everything is paid and your taxes are paid. Usually, when I write articles or talk to people, I use kind of a tagline. I started, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago, where top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, but cash is king. And if you just remember those three things, that's all that matters because you can be running, a $10 million operation and have 25 trucks. But if you're really in debt at 11 or 12 million, then what good does that do? You'd be better running a $2 million company and having a 20% profit and being great at the end of the year and not chasing your tail and having systems and peace of mind and sanity.
Yeah. So Larry, you went for years, you didn't do job costing, and then it caught your attention. I don't know if it was conversations, I don't know if it was chaos or what it was, but you started doing job costing and you are using a software program called Service Titan that Brandy is certified in, but you are using Service Titan as your job costing. So what enticed you to start job costing and seeing if every job was profitable?
Well, I think that one of the things is that as we grew, it became absolutely necessary. Before we really started growing, it was brought to my attention that we were not doing as well as we thought, and I think that that's a situation that so many people find themselves in is that they exactly like you said, you're looking at that top line number and say it goes up every year and you think that you're doing so well until you realize that you're breaking even or even worse, losing money. Um, and you find yourself in debt with everybody. You find that you're wondering what's happening. So um, really that, it came out of the pain of working so hard and not seeing what you think you should be having. And then as you grow, we're basically a few divisions here in our company now. So, we have a chimney side, we have a fireplace retail store, we have a service side, then we also have our sweeps. So each one of those areas kind of needed to be looked at separately. Um, and for instance, our service department, we were just kind of um, going out there and saying, yeah, we'll add 50% to our parts and we'll be okay. And we're just going to charge for our regular service call. If we have to make another trip out there, we're not going to charge anything extra. Um, but once you once you do exactly like what Chuck said, you figure out what each of these departments need to make, and you do find your break even, and you determine what profit you want on each division, um, and you follow through. That is the hard part too, is making sure that everybody in the company is following through with that pricing, with your procedures. Once you do follow through, it becomes easier to make money, but then also to break all of that down and see where everything went. And Service Titan um, has helped tremendously because all of that information is put into the system as far as parts go. The employee's pay is in there. Also, what we're truly paying for that employee is in Titan as a labor burden. Um, and then, we looking at unbillable hours also is huge to come up with what you want at the end of the day. But having it in Titan is great as long as everybody's putting the right information in there. Um, it can automate things.
Gotcha. So how hard was it for you to get Service Titan to give you this data, this information? How hard was it to get Service Titan set up to do that?
Well, it's very easy, just like any software, to put numbers into it. But the trick is to put the right numbers in. So Service Titan, it's very simple, but until you understand what your break even is, what you're truly paying someone per hour, what your overhead is, um, it's pointless to just put a
Yeah.
number.
So Cheryl, we'll go over to you for a minute. You've operated a manufacturing entity that we started back in 2004. We started that, which you own it, and you've operated it for quite a few years successfully. But ever since day one, you have always done job costing, where every product that goes out your door, you know what your profit is. In fact, you even factor in a waste factor into yours and what in your pricing of what your material waste is in that job. So how do you do this? What's the IBD system that you use for job costing from a manufacturing point of view?
Mine's very simple. I mean, we don't have as many parts and pieces as these other guys do. So mine's done on an Excel sheet. The only thing we change on the sheet that we calculate on is the pricing of products as they go up and down. And then the guys in the shop just fill out a sheet of the hours and the amount of material they used on a particular product. We feed it onto the Excel sheet. It throws up the numbers. We even throw freight in there. Everything's in there from the time we started thinking about it, which we have a think time in there also. From the time we start thinking about it until it's completely put on the skid and shipped out the door. And then we can go and we can see exactly to the penny what we made on each piece that goes.
Okay, let's explain what think time is, because I think this may be a factor that a lot of people do not factor into their costs. And so you want to explain what think time is, because we started that from the very beginning.
Well, I hand the guys a framing CAD that I need for a frame. You have to literally have to think about it, because ours, everything is done is all except maybe the fire pits. They're custom, so nothing's the same. So you have to take the time to think about exactly how you're going to place it. We've got to think about where to make things, where the vents fall perfectly, where everything's exactly spaced. We do as much on the paperwork as we can, but when it gets back to the framing, the guy has to actually sit down there and look at it, calculate how many studs he needs, whatever he needs to be done. And it's just mainly think time. It's the time that no one usually thinks about, no pun intended, because it's not physical labor, it's mental labor.
Gotcha. So, in comparison to a service business, what we're talking to, you need to remember your guys, your gals probably need to do a little thinking. They're going to need to look at the paperwork and compute what they're going to do. It's not going to all be automatic. So the think time was something we built into your job costing from the beginning, because we saw that. Just as we computed what was our average material waste in a job, we knew we were going to waste a certain percentage of metal, of hardy board in manufacturing. So we actually go by weight on that, because that's what you're paying. We know that hardy board costs so much, weighs so much per square foot. And that's how we came up with the waste, with the job costing in your business. So Brandy, you're sitting back there listening to all this. What questions would you have for Chuck or Larry on this job costing concept?
Yeah, I have a couple for both of them. The first one would be, so CSRs, do you calculate that into your labor burden at all? I don't know. Like, so, obviously they're spending time on the phone, booking that customer. Chuck, I'll go to you first. Do you calculate that into the labor burden? And if so, how do you figure that?
So what I did is I identified everything it cost me to basically put the key in the lock and turn the lights on every day. So it didn't matter if it was heating and air conditioning or CSR or the average amount of flat tires. I even went to the extreme of figuring out how long a drill would last, how long drill bits, saw blades, things like that, from data that I had over years. And I could say, oh, I'm going to buy so many diamond circular saw blades in a year on average. And I have to account for the CSR. And one of the things that Larry was touching on, if we need to spell it out completely, when you're talking about what you're paying a person to work for you, and I'm just going to use the number $20 an hour, they're not costing you $20 an hour. They're probably going to cost you about $35 an hour, because you have to factor in your vacation time, your average sick leave, and then your workers' comp, liability, and anything else that goes with your business. So if you're really doing your billable hours thinking I've got 3 people at $20 an hour, you're not paying $60 an hour for that. And if you are, not only are you losing money, but you're not even breaking even. So to answer your question, I calculated everything. If we had our office carpets cleaned, twice a year, I figured that stuff in, because it's coming out of the profits if you don't. And if you think these little things don't add up, draw up a list of repeat times to a job. When we calculated a job, we knew how many average warranty calls we would have to go back on a job. So it might be only 1 in 10. Well, then 10% of whatever that cost would be added to every job, if that was the number, to be able to go back for quote unquote free to the client. It's like an insurance plan. You spread the cost amongst all of your jobs.
Okay. Larry, what about your case? In Brandy's question about computing the CSR office administrative time in, do you add that in your job costing?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and something that people probably forget about. For me, it like I mentioned with our divisions, it is you're going to have less. We have less CSRs dedicated to our service department. Most of our CSRs are dedicated to probably the chimney side, with the sweeps and the estimates. And so we've kind of come up with a percentage of their time where it's spent. So, say we have, if we do have a dedicated CSR for the store, they would be computed into the overhead of that division. Same thing with like the inside sales. They are directly related to the fireplace store as well. Same thing with the rent, the actual store itself. How much space are we using for chimney? How much space are we using for the service department? How much space are we using for this department? And it's all kind of broken down into percentages, and that percentage would get added to the overhead for that division.
Yeah, Larry, can we add this in? I think there's also been a lot of outside help for you guys in the use of CFOs for a period of time to help you come up with this, is bringing in the outside expertise to actually help you put this all together. Would that be a true statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the pieces that I found pretty useful is Grandy's planning for profit.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I put all these numbers into. But yeah, it takes people to open your eyes to all the different parts that are running. And by no means am I where I need to be yet, but I realize how important every little piece is.
Well, I think it would be very good to say that it's an ongoing process, and it goes under lean principles. We want to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday, and we definitely want to see a much better at the end of 2024 than we are at the end of 2023. and we strive for this each and every year. So, Brandy, you said you had a couple questions. What else? You
Yes.
got
So
on
my
there?
follow-up question to that then is, because it seems daunting, I'm not going to lie. It seems very daunting, like how much do I pay for silverware? How much do I pay for cups? How often are you adjusting that? In other words, things are constantly moving. So RIT may go up one month and then the next month supplies might go up. Are you adjusting it every time one of those costs changes, or are you just evaluating it, say, on a every 2-month basis and then redoing the numbers? Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, Larry, you want to start and give your answer to her question?
Sure. So, honestly, I'm not doing it as quick as I should be doing it. However, I do know when when there are some bigger changes in the company. For instance, we just bought 4 trucks. Um, we hired 5 people in a span of a month, and um, that that was very important that I get that into the system, get that into the numbers immediately, because what happened was, because we have more workers, our hourly wage actually that we're charging actually dropped because we could produce more, and that helps the store. Um, at one point we're trying to charge a customer. You may be charging your customers, $150 an hour, and finding that it's not working. Um, by hiring those people, I was able to see our wage drop. Our prices became more competitive. Um, so as long as we can keep that amount of people, it worked out better. So yeah, it's not every little thing. Um, and as far as like counting every little thing, you can easily put those little things into a big bucket for cost. It's not that you need to track every box of screws, but you may have a category called consumables, or things that you go through all the time. You'd want to put that into a bigger bucket, and you do want to get a pretty accurate number, but that's minor compared to hiring people and buying trucks and equipment.
Gotcha. So, Chuck, what would be your answer to Brandy's question about how often did you look at your cost of doing business? Was this something you sat down and did weekly, monthly, biweekly, or how did you handle this?
I did it weekly. So I would get a report at the end of the day every Friday, and I would go through all of my numbers. And then I would check that next to the sheet of what my budget was. And then I would notice that if anything was going up, and if something went up in a cost category, before I threw the baby out with the bathwater, I would ask why. So was it a waste? Was it a time issue? Or was it a material cost from a vendor that went up? And then the nice thing about the program we used, I used ServicePal for our CRM. And then what we could do, as long as the guys weren't working in the system, so usually after 5 o'clock every day, if I wanted to change it, I could go in there. But once you get your formula set, you never have to tweak anything again other than your profit multiplier. So if all of your costs are sort of staying the same, and then all of a sudden something happens drastically, instead of going in changing every category, if you were multiplying by, I'll just say 2, you could change it to 2.1 as a quick fix if it was in the hectic time of whatever your busy time would be. And then you just redo that every year. So that's how I would tweak it.
Right. And that's what people have to do. That's what we call backing off and working on the business, Chuck. Would you agree?
Oh, well, that should be the main responsibility of the CEO or the president or the owner. You should have an organizational chart with people doing the different tasks. Think of them as divisions. The biggest gold nugget that I'm pulling out of this, from what Larry's been sharing, hopefully people will pick up on, is that he's treating his business not as one business. It's a parent operation with 4 different divisions. So he's pricing those as 4 companies or 4 vendors working for the main corporation. So that's the way you need to do it, because as he was sharing, the cost codes of what it costs to operate the office or the fireplace store or the service center or the installation is going to be different. So you have to have a subcategory to set your prices for each one of those divisions.
Okay, fantastic. So Cheryl, you got any other questions for Chuck or for Larry today?
Okay, Larry. I know you train Service Titan and everything else, so this was probably more directed at you. Okay, Larry knows what's going on. Is there someone under you that, if you are out for a period of time, can pick up this part of the business and move it on until you're back?
Well, fortunately, I mean, as far as keeping the numbers correct, for the most part, that is my responsibility, but I can do it from anywhere. So I don't think that there's a need, but and I haven't gotten to the point where I've passed this on to anyone. So and as I said, I'm not by any means proficient or fully capable at this yet, but once I am, then yes, it will be passed on.
Yeah, but Larry, to compliment you,
And
you have really grown in this role since I've known you. From, like I said, from where I walked into your business the first time to where you are today, it's a completely different world today, completely different from appearances, from everything. And you're really to be complimented on what you've done, because you've really put in a lot of hard work for this. Cheryl, we have a question came in from Tom Wright. He wants to know how you line item think time on the invoice, or do you? You want to address that question?
It's not line item, Tom. It took a lot of years to come up with a factor that we put in where basically I can tell you how long they're going to have to think on this particular island or that one. And usually it's just factored into our base pricing. If you tried to figure every one of them, then it would really throw you off. I do take anything over the time that I expected it to do. In other words, if I expected it to take 30 minutes and it took an hour, that 30 minutes is pulled out as waste. So it gives me a definite clue as to what's going on. And if there's too much think time going on, we're not doing enough in the office to help them get past where they need to be. But on the other hand, their think time a lot of times will save a mistake that may have been passed on in the fumble to them. We're not perfect in the office and a lot of things either. So it's kind of a balance off, but it's figured in the base cost of the island. There's not a separate line item, no.
Okay, got you covered. So, Brandy, what about you? Any final questions for Chuck or for Larry?
Not so much questions, as I think this is just such a good topic and such an educational point, both from a consumer side and an employer side. So when our customers call and they're talking about, no offense, Chuck down the road, or Chuck in the truck who charges $60, it's an easy conversation to have with them why we're so much more expensive. Well, that person is probably not paying their people a living wage. They probably are not providing health insurance, dental insurance, paid days off, etc. And I've actually booked appointments by telling customers that. And then from an industry standpoint, first of all, this is very timely because we raised our prices all across the board 3% this morning. But also just, I think there's people that they look at other companies that are big and they think, oh, I want to be that. And they may not know that that company is not profitable, or they look at how much they gross, like you said in the beginning, and they think, oh, this is amazing. They're grossing $5 million. Who cares if you're not taking home, as a business owner, you should be at least taking home 6 figures a year, or it's not even worth it. So who cares how much you're grossing? I know one of my things this year is we slowed down a lot this year. 2023 was a much slower year for us than we've had in the past couple of years. And, I went to Jeremy, my husband, and said, I'm really worried we're slow, because I'm looking at how many phone calls are we getting a day? How many are we booking? And he was able to put my fears to rest by showing me the numbers from our CPA and the numbers that he had done, and said, look, yes, we're smaller, and yes, we're doing, it feels slower, and it is slower, but we're more profitable. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. And to Chuck's point, I think you can have a small company and be very profitable. Or to Larry's point, I think you can grow into a big company and be very profitable, but you have to be aware of these numbers.
So, Randy, how did you come up with a 3% price increase?
Because that's what my husband told me to put into Service Titan. That's the answer to that. So you'd have to ask Jeremy that.
Yeah. So, Tom, to answer your question, when you work with average businesses on this subject, what percentage do you find they are inefficient on average? I hate to say this, Tom, but just about everyone. Just about everyone. And since I have one client, both of the guys on there have been or are clients of mine, you can bet that when I walked in the door, Larry, did I point out things you never saw?
Absolutely.
Did
And
it hurt? Did it hurt your feelings?
it did. It did.
Chuck, what about you?
I don't have feelings. I like answers. So no, you've never hurt my feelings. But yeah, that's the nice thing about having somebody from the outside that's competent to come in. You're going to get a different perspective and a different view. Things that, we don't see. It's just like the house you live in. There might be dust under the couch that you don't pay attention to. But if you have your mother-in-law come over, she's going to point it right out to you. So that's kind of the way to look at it. But don't get upset at the mother-in-law. Clean under the damn couch.
Okay. So, Chuck, I'm going to ask you, I want to clarify something you said, because people have got to really dig down to get this number. And that is, you said if you're paying someone $20 an hour, it could be costing you $35. Well, that's just conversation. And what you've got to do is you got to really dig to find what that cost of that person is. Chuck, would you agree what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. That was just a quick example, to make you understand. Just because you're paying a person $20 an hour, you're probably paying them close to double that, but it's going to vary based on the benefits,
Correct. If you're a brandy and giving them everything like Blues Brothers does, and birthday cakes and all this stuff and special occasions and all that, then brandy, it increases your cost to do business, doesn't it?
It does. And it's an important point. So for example, we pay 100% of our employees' health insurance. And so the average employee thinks that we'll use Chuck's number, thinks that they make $20 an hour. And so one of the things that we have to do each year is, and I learned this years ago from one of the hospitals I worked at, is we break it down and show them, you're not making $20 an hour. You're actually making $30, $32 an hour, because we're paying 100% of your health benefits and we're matching this much in your retirement. And so it's also important that you're showing your employees that they're not making just $20 an hour.
That's correct. And that's where having that open and honest conversation with your workforce is so important. So to summarize what we've talked about, you got to be looking at that bottom line profit. If you go to a bank and you want to borrow money and build a building, buy property, get a credit line, then you got to show bottom line profit. That top line gross doesn't mean anything whatsoever to a bank. They're looking for the bottom line. They're looking at what's called your GCF, which is your global cash flow. So you got to be looking at this. If you're not doing job costing, think about it. Is it going to take a little bit of work to get it there? I can guarantee it is. But what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to derive the true benefit by getting the profit that you deserve for running the business that you do. Because I tell you, running a business is not easy. It is a very heart-wrenching, full of headaches things, and you need to deserve a good profit for doing it. So anyway, we are CVC Success Group. If you need some help figuring out what your problems are in the business, or if you want somebody to come in to hurt your feelings, okay, give us a call. We'll be glad to have a conversation with you. and let's get you to where you dream of in business. And with that, appreciate you joining us this week on this episode. We'll see you next week on our next episode of the CVC